did you sign off on that meeting, having regard for the list of attendees?
I don't sign off on meetings.
Mr. Carney's chief of staff came before this committee and testified that you had been made aware of that meeting and that you signed off on that before it took place. Is that accurate?
He did. Okay, fine. Yes, we can. Those are. All this way. Yeah, I mean. I'm sorry. You're losing me.
I don't have confidence. Do you? At yesterday's committee meeting, MPs discovered that the Ethics Commissioner never reviewed the more than 2,000 companies connected to Brookfield before ruling that Mark Carney had no conflict of interest. When pressed, he could not explain why those obvious avenues weren't checked or why apparent conflicts were dismissed. Democracy Watch has now confirmed he even contradicted his own annual report on this very point. Taken together, it proves what many suspected. The watchdog isn't guarding the gate. He's holding it open, waiting for his next treat. Let's take a look.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Welcome, Commissioner. Welcome to your team. Mark Carney's ethics screen that you set up lists 103 companies, almost all of which are Brookfield companies. The chief operating officer of Brookfield, Justin Bieber, told this committee that Brookfield owns 2,000 companies and businesses. Do you have a full and comprehensive list of all of Brookfield's companies and businesses?
We have a list of what the Prime Minister and his lawyers furnished us, and it is attached at Annex A to the screen.
So you do not have a full list of the 2,000 Brookfield companies?
No.
Okay. So Mark Carney holds stock options and deferred share units in Brookfield, potentially worth tens of millions of dollars. The chief operating officer of Brookfield said that in respect of Carney's stock options and deferred share units, quote, as the value of Brookfield increases, the value of those instruments increase. So accordingly, it follows that as Brookfield-owned companies do well, Brookfield does well, and by extension, Mark Carney does well. So if you don't have a full list of the companies, I would put it to you that you are missing potentially a whole long list of conflicts of interest or potential conflicts of interest that Mr. Carney has with Brookfield companies.
The Annex A to the screen lists the first five companies. This is really the ones who own all sorts of other, the rest of those, directly, indirectly, or in which are dealing with those. It's clear that Mr. Carney's compensation is tied to the future compensation is tied to the success of Brookfield. But in order to avoid that he makes decisions which can be seen to benefit Brookfield and thereby indirectly himself, he has set up, first of all, he's put everything in a blind trust, but secondly, he set up the screen to make sure that any decisions that he makes regarding the five key holding companies, he is, or the ones that he knows about.
Commissioner, I think you said it exactly right, that Mr. Carney's portfolio is tied to Brookfield. As Brookfield does well, so does Mark Carney, and yet 95% of Brookfield companies are not subject to the screen. How do you explain that?
I don't know where you get these 95. What you have before you is his statement saying these are the companies that he knows about, and he, etc. And then the entities that appear before the lobbyists, and also the entities that were defined by our office, etc. That's essentially the universe we know about, and as he himself says in Annex A in item C, that I had no role in managing them and no direct financial interest in them.
Okay, so either von Finkelstein is too old and he doesn't understand what's going on, which that may actually be the case based on his behavior, or he's lost the plot, or he's being deliberately obtuse. Those are the only three options that I see. Like, this isn't complicated. Michael Cooper laid this out. The stock options in Brookfield, which may be where Mark Carney stands to make the most money, have a direct benefit if Brookfield does well. So as Brookfield increases in value, the stock options increase in value, and then it increases Mark Carney's payout at the end. Right? The fund, the Global Transition Fund, that also has a payday with that, for Mark Carney because of the deferred interest payments. So, well, Finkelstein is saying, well, I don't understand what you're talking about. These 95% of the rest of the companies in Annex A, he states all of these things here, and he doesn't have a direct investment in those other companies. It doesn't matter. It doesn't matter. Like, here's the thing: are we going to be fussing over a tiny company that Brookfield may own, that will essentially be a rounding error in terms of benefiting Mark Carney and the stock options he has? No, like, nobody's going to care about that, because you can't argue that is a conflict of interest, because he doesn't stand to benefit really anything from it, right? What Canadians are concerned about is the rest of the companies that Brookfield has a vested interest in. Where are they? What are their names? Where are they operating? And is any of the actions that the Prime Minister or Canada government taking, are they benefiting any of those companies in other parts of the world? That's what needs to be shown. Because if Canada is benefiting those countries through its foreign policy, through legislation, through its domestic policy, then those companies will increase in value, which then increases the value of the shares that Brookfield owns in them, which increases the value of Brookfield itself, which increases the value of Mark Carney's shares. And they would have to be significant, right? Even like the indirect benefit that Mark Carney will get from these, it has to be significant. Otherwise, we're just talking about pennies on the dollar here. But if it is significant, we need to know. But this is the question. Because we don't know, the questions still need to be asked. Because we don't know what these companies are, and because we don't know if they're benefiting significantly or not from the policy of Mark Carney and his government, the questions will remain. And this is what Canadians need the answers to. And the fact that the Ethics Commissioner is saying, well, he doesn't own them directly, it doesn't matter. We need to understand that. And the fact that you don't understand that means that you're not doing your job.
So now you're saying he has a financial interest. I don't know how you are you contradicting the statement made in Annex A?
I'm simply referencing what Mr. Bieber said, and in light of the fact that Mr. Carney has stock options and deferred share units, and I know that we saw a letter from Brookfield today that merely dismisses these companies as de minimis. Are you just taking Mark Carney and Brookfield at their word, or have you sought to get further information, given Mr. Bieber's testimony that there are these 1,900 other companies? Are you going to go back to Mr. Carney and go back to Brookfield and say, provide us with a list of those companies to determine whether or not additional companies should be added to the screen?
Lynn, do you want to answer that?
So, essentially, when the screen is a preventative measure, it's there to anticipate conflicts of interest. It's not there for the Prime Minister to avoid a conflict of interest. So for all intents and purposes, if a matter is brought to the Prime Minister's attention and the Prime Minister is aware that it would further the private interests of Brookfield, then he would have to recuse, even if the screen did not capture that item because it's not on the
I understand
annex.
how the screen works.
Yeah.
I'm just asking, why will you undertake, or are you intending to get a list of those companies in light of Mr. Bieber's testimony? That was my question.
Okay.
Well, of course, we looked at these companies and to make sure we know what the interest of, and most of them, as Mr. Bieber said, are de minimis. But any kind of deferred compensation that you
Or taking
Thank you.
Brookfield at their word.
Okay, this is just insanity now. So, because Finkelstein's like, I don't even know what he's talking about. Maybe you should step down as ethics commissioner if that's the case. His colleague, she is now saying, well, the ethics screens are there as a preventative measure. They're not there for the Prime Minister to avoid a conflict of interest. What? I'm pretty sure the whole point of an ethics screen is to prevent the Prime Minister from being in a conflict of interest. Let me word that another way. To avoid being in a conflict of interest. Now, I assume that was just a slip of the tongue. But come on. I'm not the one that works in the office. I'm not the one that lives and breathes this day to day to day. She is. I would expect better testimony from somebody coming to parliamentary committee, knowing why they're coming, because the committee is studying the Prime Minister's conflicts of interest. And again, it's this laissez-faire attitude of, well, even if there's a company that comes across his desk and it's not part of the screen, it's expected he will recuse himself. Isn't the whole point of the screen so that when people know there's a company that relates to Brookfield that's coming across the desk, they can identify it and keep Mark Carney away from that? And here's the issue. None of the people, at least to our knowledge, that are managing these screens know what these other 1,900 companies are. Who would know? Maybe the guy that was helping build the funds. That would be, what's his name again? We know his name. Mark Carney.
Commissioner, on April 30th, 2 days after the federal election, Mark Carney was personally lobbied by North River Midstream. North River Midstream is a Brookfield portfolio company that is subject to the ethics screen. Did Mr. Carney or his office contact you prior to meeting with North River Midstream?
As I told you before, any conversation I have with Mr. Carney, etc., is confidential. If there's anything made public, it's from him, not from us.
Thank you for that. But we know that Mr. Carney was lobbied by North River Midstream. Mr. Carney, on May 6th, a week later, met with Sam Pollock, the CEO of Brookfield Infrastructure in Washington, D.C. Brookfield Infrastructure is also subject to the ethics screen. It has recently come to light that in October, Mr. Carney met with the Chief Operating Officer of Brookfield, Justin Bieber, in the Prime Minister's office. So here we have a pattern of Mr. Carney meeting with top Brookfield executives who have direct access to the Prime Minister, as well as Brookfield-owned companies. Is this what you envisioned when you set up the ethics screen?
I wish you would not focus on the ethics screen, but understand the system of it. The system is clear. If there's a conflict of interest, the Prime Minister has to recuse himself, and his recusal is made public. That is the basic rule. to help him live the opposite, because he's a busy man and he deals with thousands of issues. The office has established a screen to try to make sure that he doesn't get exposed to it. And that's what the supposed to. So you're asking me what the screen has to do?
The conflicts involving the Prime Minister are so vast with respect to Brookfield that you saw it necessary to implement a screen as a precautionary measure. And yet, and Mr. Sabia said that you told the Prime Minister to basically stay away from Brookfield. And yet, here we have the Prime Minister meeting with the Chief Operating Officer, being personally lobbied by one of the major Brookfield companies that is on the list of companies that is captured in the screen. And I'm asking you, does that not raise questions about whether, in the face of all of Mr. Carney's conflicts, Brookfield has a direct line to the Prime Minister?
The incidents that you recited just now, would you please recite them again? Which ones are you talking about?
North River Midstream. Prime Minister personally was lobbied by them. He met with Sam Pollock.
What do you mean by he was personally lobbied by them?
He was lobbied by North River Midstream on April 30th. They met with him. And on May 6th...
But I'm sorry, when you say he was lobbied,
there's a disclosure of that.
Disclosure under the Lobbying Act that they made a representation to Mr. Carney?
That's right.
Okay. Go on, next one.
Mr. Pollock, the CEO of Brookfield Infrastructure, and then in October, the Chief Operating Officer of Brookfield. It certainly seems like he has an awful lot of contact with Brookfield, and not just anyone from Brookfield, but the CEO of Brookfield Infrastructure and the Chief Operating Officer of Brookfield.
And this was prior to the election, after the election?
It was after the election. All of these were after the election.
All of these were after. Yeah, I mean, you know what the rules are, and how this screen is established to prevent everything, etc. You're talking about the meeting with Mr. Bieber, etc. I understand from the Prime Minister, from Mr. Bieber's testimony, that this was about anti-Semitism. It had absolutely nothing to do with business, and that it was a personal visit, etc. Should it have taken place or not? You should have. That's for you to decide. If they talked about anti-Semitism, it's clearly not.
Certainly North River Midstream wasn't about that, and nor was the meeting with Sam Pollock in Washington, D.C. I would submit, and I think most Canadians would agree, that it would be a heck of a lot better if the Prime Minister just stayed away from Brookfield, but that isn't happening.
I don't understand what this guy thinks his job is. Oh, well, Mr. Bieber said this. He said it was about anti-Semitism. That's what the meeting was about. So what's the problem with that? And as for the other ones, should they have happened? Should they have not? That's for you to decide. Pretty sure that's what your job is, sir. You're supposed to be the judge. You're supposed to be the one that's reviewing these case by case and saying, you know what, that shouldn't have happened. Like, do you understand what the job of the ethics commissioner even is? Surely, based on the testimony that we've heard, and not even just the recent ones, even in the last parliament, it doesn't seem like you actually think that the ethics commissioner's job is to do anything. Why aren't you investigating the Westinghouse mention? Why aren't you investigating the fact that he was promoting Westinghouse? The fact that he was invested in Westinghouse? Why aren't you doing that? Hello? Or is your job just to sit there and collect a paycheck and pat Mark Carney on the back? Because that sure as heck seems what's going on here.
On September 27th, while in London, England, Mark Carney attended a working breakfast with Canada's High Commissioner to the UK and 8 international investors. Did you sign off on that meeting, having regard for the list of attendees?
I don't sign off on meetings, and as I keep telling you, I give advice, and the advice is confidential. It's up to the Prime Minister to disclose it or not.
Well, Mr. Carney's chief of staff came before this committee and testified that you had been made aware of that meeting and that you signed off on that before it took place. Is that accurate?
He did. Okay, fine. Yes, we did. I mean, that was a general meeting with investors as part of his duty as a prime minister in being in the UK and trying to encourage people to invest in Canada. So yes, I asked it, but I mean, this is one case where they disclosed my advice, and that since it's up to him to disclose, I can comment on it.
Okay, time out. You just said, I don't sign off on meetings. I keep telling you this. I don't sign off on meetings. But Mr. Sabia said that you did. Okay, yes, I did. So you just lied. Or obfuscated. Whatever you want to call it. You just tried to lead the committee into thinking, well, I don't sign off on meetings. But Mr. Sabia said you did. Oh, okay, so now it's public. Okay, yeah, now I'll say I did. What? I'm sorry, Mr. von Finkelstein, but you don't have any credibility as far as I'm concerned. Based on your answers that was in our video yesterday and your answers now, this is a joke. You literally just said, not even 10 seconds before, oh, I don't sign off on meetings, but we heard testimony that you did. Oh, okay, you got me. I signed off on the meeting. Come on, man. This is a joke, folks.
In your most recent report, your most recent annual report, you proposed a few amendments to the legislation. Can you share with us what changes you would like to see regarding aligning the Act and the Code of Conduct for members of Parliament? We would like to add an appearance of conflict of interest. There is something that applies to members in the code, and so they need to avoid these apparent conflicts of interest, and that's not in the Act. It only includes real conflicts of interest. I would suggest that the changes be made because for Canadians, an appearance of a conflict of interest is significant. And appearance of conflict of interest can undermine the public's trust in government. That is why I believe that we should align the code and the Act.
So that was a Liberal that actually asked that question. And I've included it because there's some relevant pieces in there. Because he talks about the MP's code and he talks about what the Conflict of Interest Act does or does not have and the recommendations as to what is supposed to be in there. And this brings us to a press release from Democracy Watch that was dropped yesterday. Ethics Commissioner misled Parliament, rolls over on floor crossing by MP Chris d'Entremont. What's this about? The Ethics Commissioner stated in 2024-2025 annual report that MP Ethics Code rule was enforceable. Now says it isn't enforceable. MP Ethics Code only expects, but doesn't require, honesty and upholding highest standards to enhance public confidence and trust and integrity. Today, as Federal Conflict of Interest Ethics Commissioner Conrad von Finkelstein testifies at 11 a.m., this is the one we're covering, folks, Democracy Watch released the letter it has received from the Ethics Commissioner ruling on the floor crossing by MP Chris d'Entremont. As Democracy Watch's complaint letter about the floor crossing set out, Commissioner von Finkelstein stated last spring on page 8 in his 2024-2025 annual report to Parliament that the Conflict of Interest Code for members of the House of Commons, quote, requires MPs to avoid both real and apparent conflicts of interest. This rule is set out in Section 2 of the MP Code. In his letter ruling on the floor crossing, Commissioner von Finkenstein now says, quote, "The purposes and principles of the code are not intended to stand alone as rules of conduct or obligations. Rather, they serve as aids to the interpretation of the code," end quote. As a result, Commissioner von Finkenstein ruled that MPs are also not required to comply with the provisions in subsection 2B of the MP Code, which says they are to, quote, "fulfill their public duties with honesty and uphold the highest standards so as to maintain and enhance the public's trust and confidence in their integrity." Now, for those interested, we have obtained a copy of the 2024-2025 annual report from the Ethics Commissioner, which you can find in the description of this video. And this is the section in question that Democracy Watch is actually referring to. And you can see where it lays this out. So specifically, and I'll repeat it, the Conflict of Interest Code for members of the House of Commons requires members to avoid both real and apparent conflicts of interest. Similar language is used in the Values and Ethics Code for the public sector, which governs the conduct of all federal public servants. The Commissioner is of the view that public office holders should not be subject to a less stringent standard of conduct than parliamentarians and public servants. As the Supreme Court of Canada has observed, integrity in the democratic process can be harmed just as easily by the appearance of impropriety as by the actual impropriety. So this is an important press release from Democracy Watch, and I encourage everybody to read it in its totality because it highlights the fact that you're talking out of both sides of your mouth here. How can you say that there's this MP code, but you're literally calling it the Pirates Code? Right? It's more like guidelines, really. Like, this is what we keep hearing over and over again. So then what's the point? And this is the most frustrating thing for Canadians to look at this stuff. You have all of these documents and all of these codes and regulations and all of this stuff, but if they're not enforceable, what the heck's the point? And the answer is nothing. And then you sit there and you say, well, you know, that's up to you to decide. No, it's actually up to you to decide. And if you don't want to decide it, then get out of the way, retire, and go home. We've heard ad nauseum from Canadians over the last 2 years, almost 3 years now, that Canadians want accountability of their politicians, and they deserve accountability from their politicians. Duff Conacher said this very well in committee when he testified. When he said, listen, why is it that the adherence to these regulations and these rules gets less restrictive the closer you get to the Prime Minister's office? Shouldn't it be the most restrictive? But yet, that's not what happens. Like, if I was, when I was working for the government, if I was in any sort of conflict of interest and that was disclosed, I'd be fired probably, or at least I'd receive quite the penalty. Not so here. Apparently, you just need an ethics screen. And we don't look into it. And Canadians are tired of the lack of accountability of their politicians. They keep calling themselves public servants. Well, where's that servant-master relationship? Because Canadians sure as heck aren't seeing it.
Very much, Chair. Earlier, Mr. Maloney stated that it's his second time being with us, and you probably have other things to do, but we talked about weaponizing ethics. So weaponizing ethics. But Canadians sometimes reach out to us, and perhaps I'll ask a question to Mr. Aquilino earlier regarding a person who is reasonably well informed. When Canadians reach out to us, I believe that they are reasonable and they are reasonably well informed. They shouldn't have the impression that we have better things to do and that it's a waste of time. So when I look at what we're dealing with, a very specific situation that we're seeing for the first time, and when I look at examples that come up in Parliament, and there's nothing new here, I stated it earlier, carbon capture, AI, data centers, nuclear, pipelines, the space agency that is 50% owned by Brookfield. So for people who are reasonably well informed, there could be an appearance of a conflict of interest at least. Do you believe that there is an appearance of a conflict of interest? Because that is what you're proposing that we change. So if we change the legislation, would you say in this case that there is an appearance of a conflict of interest? You are mixing a few things together. If the Act is amended and I can carry out investigations regarding an appearance of a conflict of interest, I'll do them individually. I'll look at all of the different cases and situations. But would you do it in the case that I mentioned? If we listen to you and we follow your recommendations, well, it would be my obligation to do so. So, you would.
Now, if you watched our video yesterday, which I really encourage that you do because it deals with C-15 and the minister's secret power grab clause that is in Bill C-15, and Michael Barrett puts that to the ethics commissioner a couple times in his questioning. He says, this is von Finkenstein, he says in that, I don't deal in hypotheticals. I need a specific example and then I can comment on it. Well, you've just been given specific examples. And if you yourself are saying, well, the Conflict of Interest Act should be amended to include an appearance conflict of interest, you've been given specific examples based on your recommendation. So this is not difficult. He's asking, based on your recommendation, do you think this would be a candidate for this type of investigation? And this is where the conservatives are trying to nail him down so that they can say, see, the ethics commissioner is recommending that we need to change the legislation to include an appearance of conflict of interest because right now there seems to be an appearance of a conflict of interest with all of these investments of Mark Carney. That's what they're trying to get to. That's where they're trying to nail him down.
I am following up on your recommendation. I'm saying a person who is reasonably well informed, people at this committee, Canadians, are wondering why there isn't an investigation because there at least seems to be a conflict of interest. Well, it's up to me to decide, not up to the person who reaches out to me. Somebody will explain the situation to me, or I'll see it myself, and I'll look at the facts and the context and decide whether or not there seems to be a conflict of interest, an apparent conflict of interest. And at that time, I would start an investigation. But Commissioner, this is being raised in Parliament. This is public and these are facts. I'm not inventing anything. 50% of the space agency is owned by Brookfield. This is a fact. We're talking about things that are public knowledge. Would you act if we were to add that appearance of a conflict of interest? I cannot answer your question. My team would look into it, and you're sharing isolated facts, and I would have the facts shared with me, and then I would make a decision after that.
Being objective on this, I understand Finkenstein's trepidation into outright saying, yes, this is an appearance of conflict of interest. Why? Why would I say that? Because what Finkenstein is saying here is, let's say this is in the Act. Then an investigation would have to occur. You should not, must not, conclude or start with a conclusion before your investigation begins. So he's saying, listen, even if it's obvious that this is an apparent conflict of interest, an investigation would still have to be done. And if your role is to be impartial, if your role is to be independent, and you need to have the appearance of being independent as well. That's the catch in this whole thing. Hasn't been doing a great job recently, but I'm just objectively speaking. Then you need to approach every investigation, regardless of what your personal bias or information bias might be, starting from a point of, I have no conclusion, and I must do the investigation before I arrive at any conclusion. So I understand from a procedural standpoint why he's saying what he's saying. The problem that people are having is when you know that Mark Carney stands to benefit from Brookfield stock options, and then you see the Canadian government dropping $500 million into the European Space Agency, which has no benefit to Canada whatsoever, like at all. Canadians understandably are saying, what the heck is going on? So it's a reasonable question. In this case, I would say the ethics commissioner's answer is reasonable, and this is why he's not answering it the way the Conservatives want him to. That's just being objective.
You have 2 minutes. So for you, you're saying that I'm sharing an interpretation of facts and not actual facts. Well, anyway, Mr. Sabia and Mr. Blanchard have stated that they communicate with you regularly. The first time you said that you came here, you said that you didn't want to be both judge and jury, and you didn't want to apply the screen. At what point do you become a part of the process? They say they have to call you every day. Is it because there are issues happening every day? And both of them said this during their individual testimonies. That's what they said. The only thing that I can say to you is that I answer their questions. If they call me, I answer. So if they call you every day, then there are things happening every day. As you know, we have a dedicated team for all of those who are elected or appointed. The Prime Minister's office speaks to the person that I appointed for the Prime Minister. Thank you, Commissioner.
This is starting to lend more credence to the theory that I postulated in a previous video, that the Conservatives seem to be slowly building a case. They haven't said it yet, but they seem to be slowly building a case and a narrative that this is the most conflicted Prime Minister in history. We are expending vast amounts of public resources just to make sure that Mark Carney's private interests are not being tripped over in the public sphere, and we're spending taxpayer money upon taxpayer money upon taxpayer money to ensure that that happens. And we have all these people that are in place now to make sure, just for the benefit of Mark Carney and his conflict of interest. It has nothing to do with the benefit of Canada. And the narrative that I think they're building towards is, how can this man possibly do his job being this conflicted? How can Canadians justify having all this taxpayer money spent on all of these bureaucrats that are essentially blockers for Mark Carney? That's their job day in and day out. When we could just have him sell all of his assets, and then we don't need these blockers. And then we're not wasting taxpayer money. And he's just like every other public servant, supposedly working for the benefit of Canada and not himself.
I want to touch on the question of the list of 2,000 companies. There's 103 that are on the screen. That information was not, as I understand it, initially provided to your office. And the question that I hear from people is, why aren't those other companies on the list? Mr. Cooper said, it's 95% of the companies on the list. So, how do we have confidence that the screen is complete, that it's working, if 95% of the companies are missing?
You have here the names. We were furnished, obviously, with the interest of Brookfield or Global Brookfield Asset Management or etc. in those companies. And so on that basis, we can those are given to us confidentially. It's such a long list, but most of them, as Brookfield pointed out, it's a minimal interest.
So that's interesting. I mean, these are huge companies, highly successful. Brookfield doesn't really seem to be in the de minimis business. So how are we defining de minimis? Wouldn't it just be easier for you to include the companies as part of the screen?
You include them if there's a likelihood of if they're being affected by their decision. Yeah, I don't know how else to explain it. We make the decision saying, seeing the interest in those companies and saying, yeah.
Did you say previously you don't have the full list, though, sir? And my question is, if you don't have the list, how can we make a determination? How can you make a determination if
I'm sorry,
you don't
what list are we talking about? Are you talking about Annex A of the screen?
No, we're talking about the 2,000 companies that in Mr. Bieber's testimony he referenced, and then later in his response to the committee that you were aware of. I inferred from your response, you're aware of his response, that these companies were referred to as de minimis. Well, are you to take them at their word? Or would it not be in the public interest to just to include the totality of the entities that might create a conflict?
Yeah, I don't know if that was a slip up on the ethics commissioner's part. And by slip up, it could be one of two things. Either he misspoke, or he knows what those companies are, or I don't know what. I don't know what. This guy seems to get confused at the drop of a hat. What list of companies are we talking? But either way, it doesn't make any sense. So de minimis means like there's the impact is so minute it wouldn't have a tangible impact on the value of Brookfield. That's what I interpret from what they're trying to say. They're minimizing the impact of these other 1,900 companies that Brookfield owns. That's basically what that is saying, if my understanding is correct. So he's saying, oh, well, these companies have minimal impact. Okay, so then Barrett says, well, how do you know? How do you know unless you've seen the list? Well, are we talking about Annex A? Well, if they're in Annex A and they have minimal impact, then why are they in Annex? Like this is. I feel dumber listening to this, but we have to call this out to Canadians to show them this is the ethics commissioner. This is the guy that is supposedly the watchdog over this whole process. I don't have confidence. Do you?
Where Mr. Carney may stand to make money from decisions that he takes that benefit those companies.
I'm sorry, you're losing me. We are looking here at the conflict of interest scheme of Mark Carney. It's by him. He testified. He in effect signed this, and he lists saying these companies. He suggests that here he had a management position or oversight role in the activity prior to Jennifer, and he lists 25 of those. After number 5, 6 to the end are basically subsidiaries or part of the Global Transition Fund, and that's why they're listed here.
Okay.
And then he also lists other companies that have been lobbied. So I don't understand where the 2000s
I'm limited on
come.
time. I want to circle back to the question that another member asked about depoliticizing, de-risking this for Canadians. We've said before, I have said before that I believe that the sale of controlled assets by someone who seeks to be prime minister Is it complicated? Absolutely. But is it possible? As confirmed in this case by Brookfield? Absolutely. And as mentioned by a previous witness at this committee, there are steps to take. I mean, the cost of the administration of the screen is covered, it's paid for by the taxpayer. So too could the government waive the tax liability on the sale of these assets so that we don't have this question. Is it 95%? Is it 100%? Shouldn't they just sell these controlled assets? And we can continue to attract good people to public office?
20
There's
seconds
also
or
a
less.
question of the valuation, not only tax liability. Lots of these are future earnings that will be determined on the performance of Brookfield.
But
How do you value those?
Even Brookfield said that they could arrive at that, and I think that when we're talking about the public's confidence in our democratic institutions, we should be able to figure out the tough questions so that we can avoid the murkiness that seems to persist here.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Oh, wait a minute. Oh, so you do understand. Oh, well, some of these are determined by the future performance of Brookfield. How do you value those? This is what the whole hearing has been about. Brookfield. And the other... If this guy is just feigning senility, he's doing a great job at it. If he's feigning just being a old, confused old man that has no idea why he's there or what is going on, he's doing a great job. Give him an Oscar. But this is a joke. I'm sorry, it's a joke. This guy needs to be fired, but this is why Mark Carney probably loves that he's there.